Well, here we are again. The Thunder building is a rather handy symbol of what today is, even though I'm doing this video the day before. August 18, 1940 was what became known in the Royal Air Force, certainly Fire Command, as the hardest day. In spite of the fact that September the 15th is known as Battle of Britain Day and still is Battle of Britain Day, the 18th of August was when it seemed all hell had broken loose and the Luftwaffe just went all out. It was kind of aided perhaps by the fact that the 17th was a quiet day. There was bad weather, there was a lot of fighting, and in true fashion the Luftwaffe still managed to lose at least 5 aircraft. I laugh because if you read any history, the Luftwaffe seem to have been ran by some idiots. They weren't all idiots, and they weren't all bad people, but that's a conversation for another day. But James Holland's Battle of Britain book, for instance, is a more modern appraisal. Either way, the 18th dawns, and from around about 11 a.m. midday, the Luftwaffe come en masse or attack on all manner of airfields and are going throughout the day. Hundreds of aircraft. Luftwaffe intelligence, which again was not really the best part of the organisation, claimed there was about 300 serviceable aircraft left in fighter command, based on Luftwaffe pilots who had said, I shot down X, Y, and Z. Conversely, it must be said, but before I go any further, that British estimates were always far higher than what was the reality. Like you read in the Piece of Cake novel by Derek Robinson, every day X, Y, all these claims are being made in the press and elsewhere. That, I don't know, they've shot down 100 aircraft every single day of a week, and yet there isn't enough wreckage or whatever in Britain, in the south, to corroborate that. And also, if they had been shooting down X amount of aircraft every day, there'd be no Luftwaffe left to send over. The Luftwaffe, as I say, they've gone like 300 aircraft, whereas in fact there's around about 850 odd fighters left. Now by the 18th, the pressure has told. The 18th proves, if anything, for instance, that a attritional fight is not one that fighter command can stick up for long. It's all round dandy, as I've said before, be the book turning over all these Spitfires and Hurricanes from factories. You need men to fly them, and without men, you're stuffed. So I'd imagine by now Fire Command 11 group are bleeding parts of, say, 10 and 13 group, although Lee Mallory at 10 group was always rather stubborn and not the most competent of leaders, unfortunately, and also he fought up with the big wing, which still divides opinion to this day, and personally not worth the effort. By the time you get all the aircraft into position, well, Douglas Bader was a keen advocate of it, but I don't know. Either way, Keith, I'm getting my leaders muddled. Hugh Dowding, old Stuffy, is leaning on the Air Ministry on the 17th and 18th. I need more men. Could you give me some men from the ferry battle squadrons? Now, the battle was fighter bomber, mostly a bomber, and it like the Defiant, could be easy picking for the Luftwaffe. And Bomber Command, a combination, I would imagine, of Air Ministry and Bomber Command, say, no, we don't want to give you any pilots. What if they invade tomorrow? We'll be weakening our counter options on invasion day. And Dowding must have torn his hair out mentally anyway. He was a fairly restrained fella, and said, well, without men, I'm stuffed. Already the OTU training, the operational training unit, whatever, is being curtailed to get men up in the air fighting, and eventually some kind of compromise will be reached. What's it called? The Army Cooperation, who fly the Lysanders and whatever, some of them are allowed or volunteer to join fighter command, or allowed to volunteer. Some of the battle pilots are allowed to, and they're coming in from the Fleet Air Arm as well, which must be an interesting thing for the Fleet Air Arm pilots. All that training in obsolete aircraft like the Gladiator and Swordfish, for the most part, and then flying a Spitfire Hurricane. Ultimately, of course, there were sea versions of both aircraft in the war. The Seafire, whereas the other one just got called the Sea Hurricane. And these chaps were put into OTU and were fighting within 2 weeks. So the training was, as I say, being cut, and you had the Czechs, you had the Poles, anyone else that was joining, being thrust into it. On the hardest day, almost 35 aircraft are lost in the air and a similar amount on the ground, and that was the troublesome thing as well. While fighters were in the air, they were also being destroyed on the ground in hangars and stuff. So the Luftwaffe, for their lackadaisical leadership, because it wasn't a uniform leadership. If there was no Goering, the Luftwaffe probably would have been a lot better organised. And also, of the armed forces, the Luftwaffe was probably the more Nazi, more political, more politicised in terms of its leadership. That's not to say it wasn't in the army and the navy, and I'm not including the Waffen SS, but the head of the Luftwaffe is one of Hitler's deputies. Very close deputy until 1940 anyway. Erich Rader is no Nazi, and I can't think who was in charge. Holder was no Nazi at the army, but the Luftwaffe leadership was. The Luftwaffe lose almost 70 odd aircraft in the air and 40 captured. So again, that's where the British and Allied pilots can crash land or bail out over southern England and be home in time for tea kind of thing. The Luftwaffe pilots, and crew, when they bail out their fighters and bombers, are being captured and are not returning. Indeed, they're probably going to be shipped out to Canada at some point. The 18th feels like the culmination of a lot of things, but it's not, of course. Until a Luftwaffe bomber accidentally drops his bombs over London, thinking it's over the estuary or some such, and until Churchill sends bombers to bomb Berlin, and then Hitler on the 7th unleashing Armageddon, so to speak. Fighter command every day are on the ropes, really. You're bombing the airfields, you're bombing the hangars, you're taking them on in the skies. They're scoring hits, as in on the Eastern Front when it kicks off. The Germans, even when they are technically winning, are still losing more every day than the British are, but the British are going to suffer some horrible losses. The 17th saw action that resulted in the only Victoria Cross awarded during the Battle of Britain, when Flight Lieutenant James Brindley Nicholson, without a H, was flying over Dover, attacked by a 110. His cockpit catches fire, and he sees another enemy aircraft and goes after it. In spite of the fire in the cockpit, I'll go with that page, he shoots down this enemy aircraft, and one assumes either bails out or manages to land. He's seriously burnt to the hands, wrists, necks, or whatever, and he seems like he was okay. And his citation is brilliant to read if you Google it. Is on the Battle of Britain website. It was in the London Gazette in November 1940, so it took a little while from the looks of it for the King, because he went off, of course, to meet the King. And as I say, it's the only VC in the battle, and yet the battle was full of some of the most heroic and sometimes desperate fighting. I'm kind of surprised that, I assume he got a medal, but that chap who, I forget his name, who he had ran out of ammo, and he rammed his Hurricane into a bomber that looked like it was going for the Palace, and the Hurricane was dug out of the road a few years ago, what was left of it anyway, and he survived. He must have got some medal for it, because he saved the Palace. But Churchill's take one with you, he did, and he lived. And if invasion had happened, it makes you wonder, would Churchill's rhetoric have been enough for fighter pilots to be ramming their aircraft into bombers? Probably, because our country was out for it. However, sadly, Flight Lieutenant Nicholson died on the 2nd of May 1945 over the Bay of Bengal, aged 28, when his B-24 Liberator went down in flames, and they didn't find his body. And as I say, he was only 28. I guess he'd be 102, 103 nowadays, but It's proof, if anything, that the few, even when they did make it through the battle, because it petered out around about October, some of them didn't see 1941, and a lot didn't see the war out. So the 18th is it, backs to the wall. And the irony is, I say irony, the weather, clear blue skies, lovely sunshine, any other summer, it would have been a summer to remember. And it was to remember, but not for good reason. Well, first time Hitler got a bloody nose, you might say. Proper bloody nose. So that is the hardest day, depending on what I think. We'll be doing one for the Battle of Britain Day on the September 15th. Thank you as always, chaps.